everyone, welcome all. Our topic today is Grit and Silver with the author and social entrepreneur Joanna Heywood. Before we get started with giving the floor to our expert speaker, I'd like to make some introductions. My name is Carol Adriansen and I'm the secretary at the Anglo-Peruvian Society, and I'll be moderating this talk. Jose Luis Ugarte, our media manager, is supporting in the background with this session. And a little bit of housekeeping to let you know about. We will be recording this session and your cameras and microphones should be switched off during the talk. So please interact with us through the chat feature. We would love to receive your questions and comments there, and I will be reading this out at the end of the presentation during the Q&A section, when Joanna will be addressing your burning questions, or if we could also let you read your questions then as well. We'll be following this talk with an email and you will receive a copy of the recording. We would also be letting you know how to get in contact with our speaker and get hold of her book. We anticipate that the talk and the Q&A will last an hour, but this may overrun, so don't worry if you need to leave, as you will have access to the recording. We have the pleasure to have Joanna Heywood with us this evening. Hello, Joanna, who kindly agreed to give a talk to the Society. Born in Brighton, Joanna was raised by her missionary parents in Belgium, where she learned French and Dutch. At university in Stirling, she studied Spanish and became interested in South America's politics and international relations. A 12-month office job in Belgium provided the means for Joanna to self-fund a year with the organization Latin Link Stride that works in the suburbs of Lima amongst impoverished but entrepreneurial migrants from the Andes and the Amazon. Grit and Silver is inspired by Joanna's 5 years of support for the women who were involved in setting up Hope Jewelry, Esperanza Joyería, a social enterprise. Every year, Joanna worked 8 months in Lima, funded by 4 months of teaching English back in Belgium. Grit and Silver is a homage to the migrants that founded the enterprise with Joanna. In Lima, there are now 30 women supplying jewelry to a UK-based social enterprise. Just Trade is not only working in Lima, where a core of 30 women produce and export jewelry, but also in Ecuador, Vietnam, to name a few countries. In 2006, Joanna had made contact with Laura Cave of Just Trade, who now follows up in Lima with further training and support. The jewelry is sold at exhibitions in top outlets. Joanna herself lives in East London and is Oxfam's GB's Impact Investing Director with projects in 10 countries. Over to you, Joanna.
Thanks, Carol. That was a very substantial email that makes my life sound perhaps more exciting than it really is. But it's lovely to be here. And I'm going to be talking about this book called Grit and Silver, which is going all blurry on my screen. But it's the book that we're going to be talking about today. And we're going to talk a little bit about how it came about, how it's written, what it's like to write a book, because it's really hard, a little bit about the women featured in the story, because it's based on true lives. And we're also going to talk a little bit about the style of magic realism, which is the style that this book is written in. So I was going to do a bit of interaction, but people are off camera. So I just wanted to know if anyone's read the book. Maybe do a thumbs up or a wave if you know where that is, if you want to acknowledge that you've already read it or bought it. If not, I will assume nobody has, and that's probably just giving you a flavour from scratch is the easiest to do. And I'm going to put some slides up, because it's always nice to have some visuals to back up a story. So here we go. Sorry, just share my screen first, bear with me. Okay, maybe Carol can let me know if that is visible.
Yeah, that's coming up clear. And there's a few comments saying that they've read the book.
Oh, great. Okay, well, hopefully that will be still useful for you to hear a bit more about the book, even though you've read it, but I would love to hear a little bit more about what you thought of the book if you have read it. I hope this can be an interactive session. So here is the cover of the book, now not quite so blurry. It's a magical realism novella, and it's about the lives of three women growing up in poverty in Peru in the 1990s. Their partners are, one of them is, her partner is a soldier and a drug producer, both. One is an illegal, married to an illegal logger, and the third is married to a terrorist leader. The women experience all kinds of adventures, as you can imagine, as part of daily life. And really, life is tough, and life is slightly on the fringes of crime. There's displacement, there's the grit of survival when you move somewhere else, particularly moving to urban slums or the settlement areas, which is where I was working. And really their destinies in the book are intertwined, and they come together as they are all striving for a better life. So in this story, in this talk, I'd like to talk a bit about myself first, about especially the Peruvian bit of my life, which was short but very, very formative. And then I'm going to talk about trying to write a book, because spoiler alert, it isn't easy. And then the stories, and delve a bit into magical realism. And I'll read a couple of very short extracts along the way. So in terms of my story, we don't need to repeat my background, which Carol already outlined. The really critical thing here is that I had no particular reason for falling in love with South America, and maybe some of you share that with me. Particularly Peru, I had no reason to. There was no family background, there were no family links, there was no Spanish in my family, and yet somehow I was absolutely obsessed with it from a very young age. And the only thing I wanted to do as soon as I finished university was to go and live there, and to experience what it was really like. And I had this vision in my head of the Amazon and the jungle and cascading water and dense undergrowth, and parrots and lots of noise of humming from insects and all that lovely stuff. And I arrived in Lima in 2000, and you'll know what Lima's like if you've been. It is an arid desert where it never rains, and there are no plants except if you are quite well off and you can live off nicer areas where there's plants growing and parks. So it was a real shock to the system. And I was working in the Cono Sur, which is the south settlements of Lima, which are really, they were, at least in 2000 when I arrived, very poor areas where people had mostly migrated due to poverty or because they were escaping from terrorism in rural areas. And this was all during the time at the end of the time of the Shining Path. So there was really this sense of transition, that people had just arrived, they were settling, they were in these areas where there was no water, no electricity, no roads, and people would just arrive and they would camp, and they would camp out and they would start a new life. So it was an incredible time. I was working with a missionary lady who was absolutely amazing and very energetic. And the way she worked was she would set up children's clubs in these areas, working with the mums, getting to know the mums. And then she would start churches through this community. And when I got there, she'd been in Peru, I think, for 25 years and had planted 9 churches, pretty much single-handedly. So she was absolutely formidable. And she was a great person, very energetic. But what she said to me was, what I need is to help me with organizing things, and particularly helping some of these women to find better work and better jobs and earn a better income for their families. So I'm going to cut the long story short, but a year turned into 5, and I set up this Hope Jewellery, which Carol mentioned, that was working with women, that was really looking at what skills they had. And here you can see typical example of the dwelling areas, how they would have been then, and then they've changed quite a lot over the years, of course, but there's still some of that going on. As if you've been out to the Cono Sur, you will have seen it. These women were incredibly skilled, and they had this ability, which I picked up on, to copy and make things. And I was really impressed by that. So you can see the jewellery there on the right, one example of it, which is actually made from very fine silver. And using a crochet hook, if you know crochet, you can make stuff with cotton, can't you? But what happened was these women realized they could use the same crochet hook to spin very fine silver into this really stunning jewellery. So that was just one example of how resourceful they were. And the business started that way. It was in the community. I was trying to sell the stuff. I got to know this girl. She helped me out. And then it went from there. I was involved for 10 years, but the business has been running for 20 years. I'm not involved anymore, but it's fully self-sufficient business. You can look it up. It's called Just Trade, justtrade.co.uk. So you can go and have a look at examples of the jewellery, and it's buying from projects all over the world now. So it's really expanded. Anyway, 20 years have passed, and I now work at Oxfam and support enterprises in different countries in Africa, Latin America, and in Asia. And here I am on a recent trip to Peru. So this was about a year or 2 ago, in a place called Tingo Maria in the Amazon, which is an area which was traditionally coca growing. So cocaine comes from coca, the leaf, and a lot of the area there around Tingo Maria was particularly prone to terrorism and coca growing, and is transitioning. And you can see here that they are growing cocoa, which is what you make chocolate from. So it's a really, really interesting area, absolutely beautiful jungle, lush vegetation, but then you get to eat loads of chocolate as well, because you've got all these cooperatives making fabulous growth of cocoa and turning it into chocolate increasingly. So there's quite some relevance from these 2 pictures for the book, because of course in the book there's a large focus on coca and coca production, and also one of the women in the story is from that region. So last bit about me before I go into the book. My most recent love project, social enterprise, is this one, and it's called Info Latinos. It's again building on my love for South America, but this time it's actually a lockdown project. I started it in 2020 during the lockdown, wanted to reach out to the Latin American community and see what was going on for that particular community in the UK. And what I found was there's obviously a very large Latin American community in this country, more than 250,000 people, the same size as the Polish population, and yet very little going on in terms of supporting people from that community to integrate and really grow in this country without losing their identity and sense of belonging to their own countries and their own cultures. So Info Latinos was started 2 years ago during one of the lockdowns, as I mentioned, and it's now growing and growing. We've just become a charity, and we support people through mentoring, access to better jobs, and a community of support. So you can see on the right there, it's a lovely group having coffee together of people from all over the UK as well as all over Latin America we have quite a good time. So feel free to look that up as well if you're interested. So back to the book. And okay, well, my impressions of living in Peru for 5 years never left me. I've been back now since 2005. So I've been back 15, 17 years, 18 years. But it that experience shapes the rest of your life, doesn't it? And I just didn't have the courage to put the stories into writing for a long time. It took me, 15 years to overcome the fear of writing and capturing these stories into a book. But once I started in 2018, it took me 2 years to write it. Of course, part-time, alongside life, alongside job. And I think the COVID lockdown, to be honest, did actually help me write it. I finished it in October 2020, and finally it was there. So it took such a long time to write such a tiny book. And I always laugh about it because, when you hear about certain authors who are professional writers and they write a book a year or whatever, it's just amazing. But I can tell you, one book was already enough for me. It took it out of me big time. But I did want to share my top 3 tips on writing a book in case anyone's interested. I would love to hear afterwards if people are thinking about writing books, or if they are writing books or have managed to write a book. But there is really no magic formula, is the first thing. Everyone's different. J.K. Rowling, the author, the writer of Harry Potter, she has a huge spreadsheet and she organizes absolutely everything, the characters, the plots, every moment of the story. And then she starts writing. Whereas I was the opposite. I used to write in public. I used to write in the noisiest places possible. I loved having loads of movement around me, and that's how I got inspiration. But also I found it easier to write when I was traveling. So I would get on a train and start writing. So there's definitely no magic formula. Keeping it short was the other tip I had. Unless you are a Tolstoy and you can write tomes effortlessly, you're going to find it really hard to write. And like most mortals, I found it really, really hard. For me, a pivotal moment was actually when I found out that there is the average number of words for a novel is between 70,000 and 120,000 words. And that is just a crushing amount of words. And I was thinking, how am I going to write this? This is tough. This is tough. But then I looked up what a novella is. And there is an official word count for all these things. It is actually quite strict. To consider it a novel, it's 70 to 120,000 words. To consider it a novella, it is 10,000 to 40,000 words. That is tiny. So when you look at my book, you'll see it's a novella. You can read it in about a day. It's very, very short. And I think that was honestly the only way I could manage it. Self-publishing is less traumatic, is the third tip I would have for you. So in case you don't know, the traditional way of publishing a book is that you write it and then you go from pillar to post trying to get a publisher. And the publisher will reject you and reject you and reject you. Or they'll say, it'd be great, but you need to rewrite the whole thing. It is a pretty soul-destroying experience. And there is this thing called self-publishing, where all you do is pay £1,500. Okay, you have to save up to do that. But it means you don't have to go from one publisher to the next. Nobody tells you that your story is rubbish. Maybe that's a bad thing. Maybe that's a good thing. For me, it was a great thing because I didn't have the confidence. So I needed to just get on with it. And so I paid the money. They made it into a book. And the great thing is there's a thing called modern print-on-demand technology. A book just gets printed every time it gets ordered. So you don't have a stockpiling of books that you would have had traditionally, where you would have the minimum print of 4,000 and then you had to sell 4,000 books for the rest of your life. This is a way to simply print it every single time it gets ordered. So those are my top tips for writing a book. And it is, a labor of love. But if you have a topic that you absolutely love, or like in my case, stories that you just feel you have to get out there, I still really, really recommend it. So, the stories. Here's a lovely picture, 3 pictures that I think encapsulate Peru in so many ways. La selva, la costa, la sierra. Okay, the jungle, the coast, and the Andes. And as I mentioned, I thought everything was the left picture, and then I arrived and I was in the middle picture. But it wasn't quite as pretty as that when I saw it first time. It was very foggy. But the stories of the 3 women in the book are actually quite aligned with these 3 sceneries. So there's 3 women. The first one is called Maria, and she is based in the Amazon. She's the one whose partner is a soldier and also a cocaine producer. And she grows up in the jungle. Her mother knows all about medicinal properties of jungle plants. So that bit of the story, it's called Pusanga, which means love potion. And you have to read the book to find out about the love potion involved. But there is sorcery involved. There is medicine. There is jungle beliefs, and there's of course the early years of communist Marxism and how it affected people in the jungle areas. So that's the first part. That's the first story. And then there comes Rosa's story, and she is based in Lima, on the coast. That story is called Caramandunga, which I don't know if anyone here knows what that means. It's quite a niche word. I think it's only Peruvian. And it's a sweet aniseed bun that you can buy in bakeries. Absolutely delicious. But I loved that word, and I just thought it was such a good word to encapsulate sort of Lima life, Caramandunga. So Rosa is from Lima. She's from the jungle, but she's in Lima. Her part of the story is in Lima. Her partner is actually an illegal logger. So he's illegally transporting logs through the rainforest to Lima. And there you find out all about life in the slums. And those chapters are very personal to me, because so much of those stories are from when I was living there, the kind of things that I came across. And there's a description of working as a maid and what that's like in the wealthier parts of the city. There's stuff about a wake and what happens when there's a wake, when somebody has passed away and the whole community comes together. Also living in areas with no running water or electricity, and what that means and what it feels like and what it means for the children growing up there. But also the effect of terrorism on urban areas in the 90s, and what was happening there with explosions, explosives being put onto pylons, and then there would be blackouts for very, very long periods of time. So, really delving into life in the city in the 90s, and particularly through the eyes of this woman. The third story is in the Andes, and it's a lady called Augusta, and it's the bit of that bit of the book is called Jalatoro, which means bull run, and it's in the Andes. So she's actually a real historical figure. She is not somebody I met. She's the only one I didn't meet. And she is the wife of a famous terrorist leader, the most famous terrorist leader in Peru at that time. But I did really research her because I found it fascinating. Her life was really fascinating, where she came from. And I tried to reflect what I'd found as much as possible in that third part of the book. And then finally, the fourth bit of the book is called ayahuasca, which is teacher plant, which is that famous medicinal potion that you take to purify your spirit. And that's really the denouement. It's where the 3 stories come together and where there's resolution in the plot. So I am going to leave this picture up so that you can continue to enjoy the beauty of Peru while I read a quick extract about life in the Amazon. Bear with me. When I got back from my trips to the forest, my mother would always be waiting up for me with a plate of dinner, anxious about the anacondas and poisonous dart frogs which came out at night. She would sit with me while I ate, listening to my stories and tasting some of the fruits I had brought home. Our favorite was the juicy guava, full of tiny worms, which were barely visible unless we put them right next to the oil lamp. We also loved the long bean-like pacaya, which revealed its sweet, fluffy fruit-like baby clouds, and the bumpy noni, which we sprinkled with salt. I dreamt of eating creamy avocado, but this was out of bounds. Girls can't eat avocado until they are married, as it reveals what it's like to be with a man, my mother would explain. Though my mother had never been to school, she was skilled and wise and loved imparting her knowledge to me. When my father was out, we would sit together happily, and after she had finished plucking the chickens or pounding the cassava, she would tell me all about the jungle and its secrets. My mother knew how to use cedar bark to cure a fever, and its resin as a sweet-smelling insect repellent. Rub your hand over the tree and the bugs won't bite you, she would show me. She told me of a concoction of mushed banana and how it had saved Uncle Eduardo from losing his foot from a crocodile bite. She knew which leaves to pick if you wanted your periods to stop for 6 months and which ones to spread on a snake bite for instant relief. If she had time on her hands, which was rare, she would join me in my forest walks and help me recognize the cocona fruit and hunt down charapita chilies or wild coriander. She pointed out which stalks to crush to relieve dry, itchy eyes and which trees' hollowed out branches hid reserves of pure, drinkable water. Mama, how do you know all these things? I would ask repeatedly. These are the jungle's remedies, she replied, a spark of mischief lighting her shy eyes. The forest is sacred and imbued with spirits, and you have to listen to them if you want to understand them. So that's an example of real stuff that people told me, real beliefs and real medicinal plants and stuff that people know about in the jungle. It's absolutely impressive, the amount of knowledge that communities can have and how willing they are to share it with you. So the next bit of this talk is actually delving a bit into magical realism. So the book is actually a book, it is a magical, it's trying to be a magical realism story. And if you know this style of literature, it depicts real world, real life, but with an undercurrent of magic or fantasy. It is actually originally and chiefly Latin American. So the best known examples include the Colombian Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Brazilian Jorge Amado, the Argentines Jorge Luis Borges and Julio Cortázar, and the Chilean Isabel Allende, who was actually born in Peru. I first discovered it through reading her books, and the first one I read was La Casa de los Espíritus, the House of the Spirits, which is really quite famous and was also made into a film, I think in the 90s. So the supernatural powers that several women in the book have is kind of directly inspired from that style of literature. And it did become more famous more recently. It was also used in film. If you've seen Pan's Labyrinth, which is this amazing story about the Spanish Civil War and a child and how she is caught up and copes with it. And also The Shape of Water, which is a much more recent film, you'll note that in both films, Guillermo del Toro is involved. He's the director of both of those films. And I think he must, like me, be a bit of a magical realism fan because he uses that touch. What happens with The Shape of Water is it's a really strange love story between a shy woman and a mysterious water creature. And you just couldn't make it up. I mean, you could, because they did, but it's just crazy and really surreal. So I felt, for me, that style lent itself really well to my book because it covers very serious topics like terrorism and violence and poverty and crime and betrayal. And it could have been a really, really heavy book. And I just wanted to put magical realism touches into it to allow you to be sort of slightly lighter and lighten the story with fantasy and supernatural powers and love potions and mystical creatures to give you a bit more space for your spirit to move and soar. And that was why I chose to use that style of writing. And so I'm going to read a quick second extract, which is really a little bit about magical realism. I used to love walking home from school in the small town of Tingo Maria to our farmstead deep in the Amazon jungle. As I trudged along the dirt track after a day at school, leaving the bustling town behind me, the trees would get denser and start closing in, gradually blanking out the sounds and smells of traffic and motorbikes and the busy market. Instead, I would immerse myself in the hum of frogs and bush crickets as the light turned from bright, harsh white to soft green, and the intoxicating smells of the undergrowth filled my nostrils, rich, damp earth and 1,000 plants and barks. Most of my school friends lived in Tingo Maria itself and feared going into the undergrowth alone, but I loved it. One day you will get caught by the Sachamama and she will eat you alive, they warned me. This huge solitary boa lives in the deepest jungle marshes, and at certain points of her life, every 100 years or so, she needs to put on weight and sets out looking for meat. The swishing of her huge tail makes the same sound as the Wayaga River, so she easily catches out the poor, ignorant animals and people who cross her path. After giving her prey a deadly squeeze, she stretches open her jaws, engulfs it whole by crushing its bones, and slithers back into the scrub to enjoy a century-long digestive nap. Jungle dwellers live in fear of her and whisper about her to their children at bedtime. But I never came across the Sachamama, and if I did, she wasn't hungry. So that is the end of my talk, really. I really hope you enjoyed hearing about the book. And I really hope that this talk and the book encourages you to delve more into Peru's culture and history and also explore magical realism. And maybe even it encourages you to write your own book about something that you are really passionate about. Thanks very much.
Thank you for sharing your personal journey, Joanna. That was really insightful about, your experience as a writer and your journey or what the life in Peru and how that impacted your life and where that's led you now. I don't think we've had questions come in. I know that some people have been gripped by the story, these real stories of these three women and the connection between them. Just wondering, do you know what happened to Maria, Rosa, and Augusta? Well, one of them, I guess.
Well, Augusta is the real person, isn't she? So Augusta Torre, you can look her up. It is a really strange story, and I try to reflect that in the book, but it's not known whether she died. There was a whole load of mystery surrounding her, whether she got killed, whether she was alive and disappeared to Scandinavia. So it was a very, very mysterious lady, and really worth, researching and looking her up. But the other two are still well and still in Lima, particularly in touch with one of them, and she's thriving. And as you can imagine, they left many things behind them when they moved to Lima, and they had to, start from scratch again. And it was very, very hard. And I met them 25 years ago when they were at the start of these journeys of rebuilding their lives. But I did really enjoy meeting them, because they were so feisty, and you just knew that they were going to improve their situations, because they were so resourceful and so courageous.
That's great. No, it's also fantastic to hear that you're still in touch with them, and how the lives have progressed as well. Going through that hardship, and just such an experience in that perspective. Just I got another question about when you left Peru, did you have any idea quite how hard the lives of the people from the Sierra who had moved to the barriadas? Did you have kind of a sense of what that was really like?
I had been told that I was going to be working there, but I was 22, and I think there's something about life when you're 22 where you just go, yeah, I'll see what it's like, and you put your rucksack on your back and you get on the plane, and so very little research and perhaps very little use of internet in those days. So I just arrived and discovered what was going on, and this lady, this missionary, who took me straight to the areas where she wanted me to work, and she just dumped me there and said, here you go, meet a few people and get to know them. And so I was always made very welcome by the communities, and I was always really happy to go there, even though it felt a bit unsafe. And here I was, the white girl, the young gringa showing up. It was a really, really interesting and positive experience throughout. And as I said, the women are still organised, and the enterprise is run by the local women now, and selling to Just Trade. And so they've done really, really well.
Right. So if you would have known kind of the conditions that these people were living, and perhaps you also had to face some of that yourself, would you still have gone?
Yes. I don't think you do the same things at 45 as you do at 20, but certainly if I had a chance to do it all again at 20, I would. I think at 40 you get a bit scared of things, don't you? Nowadays when I travel, I'm a lot more cautious, and I tend to not go off on my own as much as I did then. It was all a bit risky, but generally it was extremely positive. So no looking back.
Excellent. And do you feel like you have been able to motivate others like yourself to follow that example?
Do you mean go and work in other countries? I think things have changed now. I think there's less of is a lot more complex. This kind of stuff that I did. Nowadays, some people call it, being a bit of a white savior and going out and saying, hey, I'm going to help you. So I think things are different nowadays. I think now there would be more of a tendency to say, okay, I'll set up an import company in the UK, and I'll find really great businesses in Peru to buy from. I would, that's probably the way to do it, rather than going somewhere where you don't know the culture and you don't know anything, and thinking that you're going to help. I think it probably took me 10 years to do something that a local would have done in 2 years. But it happens. The great thing is it happened, and these women are still working. There's 40 of them now working in the program for the company. So it did happen, but I think there's a lot of learning, which I could talk about for hours, about how not to do this stuff.
Great. I think we have a couple of questions. Zori, right now, Florian, who's actually the chair of the society, she was asking about, did Rosa go to jail, and didn't Maria die?
Yes, so I did say this is based on real stories. So I had to do a bit of a mix, and well spotted. You can tell you read the book really carefully. So what happened was Maria is a real person who's mixed with another real person who was very important in the counter movement in Lima. And her name's gone out of my head, but she was the leader of the vaso de leche, the glass of milk movement, which was providing milk for children in very poor areas. But it was also a kind of counter-terrorist movement. For me, it was quite a difficult decision because I wanted the real story of the person I knew to be there, but I also wanted this lady, the vaso de leche lady, to be in the story because it's a very, very interesting story. And so I merged them together, which meant that she ended up dying because she was killed by the terrorists in real life. And that was quite emotionally difficult because Maria, the one about the jungle, she's not dead, she's very much alive, and she wasn't affected in the same way. And then Rosa, again, all the names and all the people's names have been changed, all the place names have been changed, but yes, Rosa did go to prison for a number of years, sadly. And to this day, I don't believe that she was guilty. I believe that she was innocent and that somebody planted the drugs in her shipment of coffee. So yeah, it was one of those very unfortunate situations which unfortunately do happen and are tragic for all involved.
Yeah, definitely. We've got a question from Fiona. Maybe you can ask Fiona to unmute herself and read her question.
Fiona?
Yes, hello. Good morning. I'm actually joining you from Vancouver. So, hello. I just wondered why you called the book Grit and Silver. What's the relevance of those two words to the story? Because I'm sorry, I haven't read the book.
Right. So I tried to be, I wanted to kind of contrast the grit is the difficult, first of all, the grit is the sand, the immensity of sand that you see when you arrive in Lima. And the grit is, how gritty and hard life is for so many people. And then the silver is the thread. So that it's the hope, it's the positive side. It's the fact that all these women were striving for more and better lives, and fiercely defending their families and caring for their loved ones. And so I really felt that there's the grit and the grime, and then there's the silver and the beauty and the hope. And then, of course, it was, silver thread was a real thing. I don't know if you were there already when I put up the slide, but we were working with silver thread in the project, and the women were amazingly skilled, and they would turn it into jewellery with a crochet needle. And so I just wanted to make sure that there was a reference to that silver thread in the book.
Thank you. I think Fiona had another question. Is that right, Fiona?
Yes, I did. And thank you for that answer, because that's very, I can imagine it now perfectly. I was fascinated in the write-up, about the women's partners, and you haven't talked about them. This cross-section of soldier, drugs, terrorism, illegal logging, which is happening actually here where I live, illegal logging. What could you add about, how do you know about those aspects to be able to write about them?
So I guess it's all based on real conversations with real people who this book is a real labor of love, because I turned it into three women's stories, but it was definitely an amalgamation of lots of things that I heard from lots of different people, but all of them were real stories. So one of the women I met was married to somebody who'd been a soldier and had then escaped the army and started producing cocaine, and another was married to an illegal logger and knew what he was doing. Another was, as I said, the terrorist. That's a real story. The person I didn't know. So Augusta Torre, worth reading about. But yeah, so they're all snippets of real lives and real tragedies that people told me about, and I would hear these stories, talking to people on the bus, in the church I was working at. People would talk to me. People like to share. They like to tell you what's gone on, and when you're interested, they really open up. And I find that here as well. If you take some time to hear everyone's story, it's nearly always powerful. But in this case, it was mind-blowing, some of the stories that I heard.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Joanna. I think being a Peruvian and from, hearing the way you've approached these real stories with such a tenderness as well, and just being careful to noting that the perspective of these women that, sometimes they get lost in the reality, the harsh reality of day-to-day life in a city like Lima. Which is it's got rather extremes at times. I think Martin had a question. Would you like to unmute yourself, Martin? Otherwise I can read it out.
Hi, Joe. I'm just going to read it out. Yeah, sorry for getting here late. Huge congrats, really, really huge congrats on this book. As an author, I know how challenging it is to write books and making the time and fitting it into to everything else, with everything else that you're doing. So my question was around if it's not already mentioned, if you've not already talked about it, could you describe the moment and the catalyst for writing this book? Was there a specific moment or something that really inspired you and inspired your imagination?
Yes, I mentioned it at the beginning, but you might not have been there yet. But I really had these stories in my head. They were stuck in my head ever since I had left Peru in 2005. And I knew I wanted to write a book, but it took me 15 years to get the courage to just say, look, that's enough now. Stop prevaricating. I had all these notes, from all the stories I'd written down from people telling me stuff. And it was all just sitting there while I got on with life in the UK. So I think the trigger was when a friend started writing a book, and she got it done in like 6 months. It was something ridiculous. And she kept saying, oh, come on, Joe, just do it. And I was going, but I'm not as organized as you. And I can't be as amazing as you. But that gave me really some kick up the butt. And I think that's what started it. And after that, I just got on with it. And as I mentioned, the lockdown helped me finish it, really, because it was that time where you had to kind of either sit down and navel gaze and feel sorry for yourself, or find some kind of random project. And my random project was finishing this book, which I was grateful to do.
Thank you, Joanna. That was a great answer. Just touching a little bit about the work that you've carried on since then, and you mentioned about Info Latinos. How is that going? Can you tell us a little bit about that project?
Yes, sure. It's a project that's been running for 2 years now, and I actually picked Martin's brains when I was starting, and it's supported nearly 200 Latin Americans so far in the UK. And we run a program every 6 months that matches bilingual buddies, often British people who've been learning Spanish and want to practice it, with Latin Americans who, for whatever reason, have been struggling in this country, sometimes because they're quite isolated, because they're often working in cleaning and hospitality jobs, don't have exposure to English much, and get a bit stuck. And really the idea is to allow people to network, to get people connected and encouraged, so that they can start to visualize why they came to this country in the first place, what they were trying to do, what and then how we can help them. So we do CV, employability support, matching people up with mentors if they want to start a business or if they are looking for a job in a particular sector. And it's great fun because for us Brits who love Latino culture, we get to speak Spanish and organize socials and have a really great time. So if there is anyone who's interested in becoming a volunteer, we recruit volunteers every 6 months. The next cohort starts in August. And so, yeah, if you're interested, have a look at the website and sign up, and we'll be in touch.
Right, that sounds fantastic. Enterprise, something that really supports people with the skills that they need. Obviously, it's a different kind of different kind of challenges, because I was also trying to link it to the migrants from the story and how those experiences that they had. And obviously there was certain methodology with the project that you were involved in supporting those vulnerable migrants. And are you seeing that is happening? Is still happening in Peru? The support that is available from the work that you do with Oxfam?
Oxfam is a totally different situation, but yes. So the work I do at Oxfam is working with enterprises, supporting enterprises with access to support and finance. I haven't actually been to Peru with Oxfam yet, as it's a fairly new job for me. But this is a space I've been in for a number of years. And I guess for me, what's interesting is in the case of what I'm doing with Info Latinos, in the case of what I did in Lima back in 2001, this is what you can call a social enterprise. So it's where you're trying to combine business with doing social good or tackling a social problem. And in Lima, it was women who were facing underemployment and poverty. And what I'm doing with Info Latinos here now is Latinos facing underemployment, often not so much poverty, but often having quite a difficult time in this country. So there's a tenuous link, because it's 20 years apart and it's in a different situation, completely different problems. But social enterprise, I think, is something I'm very passionate about in terms of what it can do.
Yeah, great. Good to hear as well. And I think Martin had a comment about perhaps linking Info Latinos cohorts, or the group of people that you're supporting, with some of our members. Maybe something that we can discuss. We always try to connect and support and definitely promote Peruvian culture and whatever support that there may be. I will talk in a moment about what's some other events that we've got coming up as well. But definitely in terms to perhaps collaborating in some way.
Absolutely, I'd love to do that. My co-founder Yolaina, who's from Nicaragua, and I are always up to giving a talk on it. So very happy to, at some point, you see me again.
We'll be happy to. Just wondering if there's any other questions from the participants, somebody who would like to just raise their hand. I like your initial, when you started your talk and you introduced the topic about trying to ask some of the participants if they had ideas about writing a book, and how so that may be something that some of the people in the audience may like to talk or discuss a little bit about, because as you say, you talked about your personal journey, how you had this idea, this amazing stories about those real women and the struggle that they went through, and where that impact that had in you, in your life and your perspective, but how that you connect to actually sitting down and writing those stories. And I'm sure we've got in the audience perhaps a mixture of some Peruvians who have moved to the UK. We've got somebody based elsewhere, which was nice to hear as well. So there may be some questions surrounding that.
Sure. And also, I think for me, one of the big takeaways is it really, everyone can write a book, but just keep it short so you don't go crazy trying to write 120,000 words when you can write 30,000 and make it a novella. But everyone's probably got a story in them, either their own life or their own reflections or stories of people that they've met. Storytelling is so powerful. It is really, really amazing. Once we get going, we've got it in us from the dawn of time. We've been telling stories, so it's always lovely when we can revive that and start writing.
Great. I don't think we've got any comments just yet. I think that we've got a couple of comments just congratulating you in the book, and that's what I heard a lot as well from when I started talking about this event. So it's definitely a gripping story that touches people in different ways, and people that are mostly interested about Peru. But even it's reading and talking to some colleagues as well, even if you haven't been to Peru, if you don't truly see what it's like, you can get that sense from your storytelling and the description, the way you write. So that is fantastic.
Thank you. And do write a review on Amazon or wherever you bought it from. I would love that. It helps a lot when you hear back from people about what they thought.
Well, when we send the confirmation email or the attendance email and sharing the recording, we can also let people know where they can get hold of the book. I think in the chat, Jose Luis also shared some of those links, so we can put that into the email as well, so that people know where to get hold of the book.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, well, I guess we're coming to the end of the talk. Thanks, Joanna, for your inspirational book and for sharing with us just how, your work experience became a lifelong commitment to help create successful small and medium enterprises. Please read the book, which is widely available online and places such as Amazon, but we will send you some details about that. It's just over 100 pages. I think Joanna mentioned it, so it can be read in an evening, in a day. It focuses on the humblest of victims. So it could make an epic film of Sendero years. So if anybody knows of a Peruvian cinematographer looking for an ambitious theme, here it is. Also for further works using the magical realism that Joanna talked about, made famous by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude. You may also enjoy Isabel Allende's novels. So just to touch on the next events, just like to take the opportunity to let you know about Peruvian Spring Lunch, which has been very popular over the last couple of years, as it coincides with the Peruvian Mother's Day celebration. This is taking place on Sunday, the 14th of May at 1:00. Also, please keep an eye on our website for future online talks. We're also aiming to host some talks in person at the Peruvian Embassy and hope to also stream these for some of us that are based outside of London. Lastly, I would like to let you know that we are collaborating with the charity Plant Your Future and the Peruvian Embassy, who will be hosting an exhibition for the photographic work by Tony Hutchins between the 19th of April and the beginning of May. So they'll be hosting a fundraising event on the 10th of May. And we will let you know about further details on how you can support this charity. They're focused on protecting biodiversity and addressing the effects of climate change. especially in the Peruvian Amazon. So any final words from Joanna?
Well, thank you everyone for listening. I really enjoyed telling you about something that's really personal to me, and I thought I might be a bit uncomfortable, but I really enjoyed it. And thank you all for so many great questions, especially the ones that showed some of you had read the book, and quite some detailed questions about the flow. So it's really, really nice to see that. And I hope that you can all be inspired by this talk to, as Carol said, look up magical realism a bit more, and look up Peruvian history a bit more, especially the 90s and 2000s, which are really fascinating years. And thank you very, very much for having me.
Excellent. Thank you, Joanna. Thank you all for attending, and good wishes for your novel work and courageous calling, Joanna. Okay, good evening all. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.